Welcome to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, where I teach educated, successful couples how to have incredible, passionate relationships so that you can stop compromising and start feeling fully alive in your relationship. I'm Alexandra Stockwell, aka the Intimacy Doctor. I'm a physician, a relationship and intimacy coach, and I'm an intimate marriage expert. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. We have 4 children and full professional lives, and we've created an amazing marriage. I've shown hundreds of couples how to do so as well. So if you want to deepen your understanding of your own relationship and learn to access new heights of emotional, sensual, and erotic intimacy, you're in the right place. I will show you how. Now, let's dive in. Well, this is a fun day for recording. With me is my husband of 27 years, Rodd Stockwell.
Hello.
Hi, sweetheart. Glad you're here. And I'm happy for you to be here for a few different reasons. I'm actually going to the airport shortly, and I'll be gone for 10 days. And it's always sort of connecting to have a conversation focused on our relationship. And so I'm happy to do that before I head to the airport. And also, I hear from many, both men and women, that their favorite episodes, well, some are when I'm teaching something that really speaks to them and they implement it and it enhances their relationship. And others are when you're on with me because you're so real and there's a dynamic that comes out that we show and then we don't need to tell. It's the kind of thing that's easier to just experience in the moment. So I'm glad you're joining me for another such conversation.
Excellent.
And you know, I recently sent an email to my list. If you're listening, if you're new to the Intimate Marriage Podcast, a warm welcome to you. And if you're a regular listener, I'm so glad you're back and appreciate you being here. And either way, if you're not on my email list, definitely join. There's a link in the show notes. You can just click on it and join my email list because I send content every day. And one of the recent emails that I sent, I got so many responses. People found it amusing, found it touching. One woman read it and it made her cry because it reminded her of her situation. And that email, I don't think of it as this profound, insightful email. The subject line was, "Where do you store your bread?"
Right, the bread. Okay.
And people related. So do you want to tell the story?
Well, basically, this is one of those situations where my family culture, what I was used to, what I thought was normal, was obviously very different from your family culture and what you thought was normal. And maybe you can represent your half, but for me, it was something I never even thought about. It was just a normal thing that when you get bread and you're not eating it in that moment, it's stored in the refrigerator, and then you get it out the next day if you want to eat some more. And it was very strange to me that one day my wife said to me, "Why are you putting the bread in the refrigerator?" as if that would be a question. So that was kind of how it started for me.
Okay. And for me, my mother, actually, and your mother is very conscientious in terms of food and what's happening in the kitchen, and my mother too. And so I grew up where we baked homemade bread. We often had European style bread. I don't remember actually purchasing sliced bread from the grocery store. And we definitely never had white bread in my home. It was all whole grain or sourdough. Anyway, 100% of the time it was stored on the counter. So yes, we ate it, but also it was in the bread box. Sometimes there's a drawer one of the places we spent a summer, there was a drawer that was the bread box. So it wasn't technically on the counter. But the point is, it was certainly at room temperature in the bread box, either on the counter or in a drawer. And that's where it stayed. And yes, it was understood that just after it was baked, it would be fresher and softer. And then it would get a little bit harder on the outside, which would make it fun to dip in soup or for toast with more butter on it. But whatever the case, the proper place to keep bread was on the counter, such that I never even really thought about it until we were married and living together. And I opened the refrigerator and there was bread inside. It was like somebody put a pair of shoes in the refrigerator. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but the point is that
I'm sure that's how it was for you.
yeah, I was like, what's this bread doing here? And like, who's playing tricks? It's not April Fool's Day.
Yeah, like, am I getting senile and just putting things wherever, and where are you going to find something else next?
Yeah, or is it some like hidden camera to see like, what do you do when somebody puts bread in the refrigerator? So the first time it happened, I just took it out, put it on the counter, and proceeded with whatever I was doing. Then a few hours later, the bread was back in the refrigerator and I still took it out and proceeded, but it definitely...
Because here am I thinking, oh, if we leave the bread out, it's going to get harder and less fun to eat. Someone must have accidentally left the bread out, so I'm just going to put it away again. Because that's obviously where it goes, is in the refrigerator.
Right. And you're not like a practical jokester. I knew you were sincere, but what were you thinking? And, it's worth saying that we had some very clear differences in our upbringing that we anticipated needing to navigate and decide how we would do things. Like one example is that I grew up without a television and you grew up watching 7 hours of television every day. In fact, it reminds me of what you shared with me so much after the time that on our first date, you wanted to go out with me, but you said...
I didn't think we'd have anything to talk about.
Because
you didn't know anything about what was on television.
Right. So what would we connect about? Obviously, that wasn't a problem and has never been. But anticipating that did not really prepare me to navigate things like where the bread goes. And it's so funny because I was talking with a client of mine after she read this email, and she was sharing how, yes, for her, when she's the one who cooks in their family, and if she would serve a meal, maybe with some vegetables and grilled cheese and, I don't know, a fizzy, a bubbly drink, that would be a lovely dinner after a long day where they'd been out and had a lot to eat. And she discovered through navigating his profound disappointment and confusion that her husband does not consider it a meal unless there is meat or fish on the plate. And if there is no meat or fish on the plate, then it's still going to be time for dinner. And these are things that I think every couple encounters, no matter how different or similar your family cultures are. And I mean, sure, you could have grown up in different countries and have a different culture in that way. Or actually, you and I both grew up in the greater New York area, and there are some big differences, but there are enough similarities that you would think these things wouldn't come up, but they come up anytime two different people from two different families cohabit and share a space like we did with the bread. And
the way that I would say it is that there were some things like the television example that we knew about, but there were other things like this bread example that we sort of tripped over. Like I was unconsciously doing it the way that I thought was normal, and you were thinking of it and doing it the way you thought was normal. And it didn't occur to each of us until we tripped over this issue that this was one of those things we needed to negotiate about.
Right. And honestly, I think now I really agree and appreciate with how you've described that. But at the time, I wouldn't have really called it tripping over it. That makes it much lighter. My experience is that you were wrong. And what did I need to do to change your behavior? Because clearly the bread gets stored on the counter. And if you're putting it in the refrigerator, like you have some kind of a bread storage deficit disorder. And you needed to change so that we could store the bread in the proper manner.
And I think that you and we went through different phases on this particular issue, but many issues in our marriage where at first, once you brought it up with me and I was like, no, that's where you store bread. I think you did compromise and just kind of let it be that way for a long time until the second or the third time you brought it up.
Right,
later.
Because I, like everyone else, was trained to compromise. And sure, I was already in medical school. I don't mean that I was an acquiescent, mousy, unambitious woman, but the key to happiness in marriage is compromise. That's what we're all taught. And so I have to say, putting bread in the refrigerator, like in my hand, actually opening the refrigerator and putting that bread in, that was painful because it's exactly what compromise is. It just felt so wrong to me. And yet it's what I thought I needed to do for the sake of the relationship. And I think it was, I don't actually remember since it's, 27 years ago, but at some point I brought it up. Like the first step out of compromise was to become curious and to find out how you were thinking about it, rather than just operating from the perspective that you were wrong, the bread goes on the counter, and you thinking I was wrong, the bread goes in the refrigerator. I was like, well, how are you thinking about it? Like, why does it go in the refrigerator? And I found your answer really quite reasonable, which is that if it's on the counter, it gets moldy faster. So putting it in the refrigerator allows the bread to be healthy to eat for longer. And do you remember when I shared why it goes on the counter, why one would do that?
Oh, no, I can't really think of any reason why someone would do that. But I do think it's more natural, and in a way, it depends on how fast someone eats their bread in their house. If you make it fresh and it's gone within a day or two, I think it's different than if it's around for 2 weeks.
Right. Well, I think one of the main reasons to put it on the counter, if it's going to be eaten before it gets moldy, is because in the refrigerator, it gets sort of soggy, and I can't get too scientific here, but
it's the opposite of drying out.
Yeah, the starch, it changes the composition and then it makes it less delicious. But the point that I think...
Well, I just want to say that even when you brought it up and you heard my point of view, I got the sense, because it was quite a while after that our family culture was still put it in the refrigerator. And I think still you were kind of in compromise mode. And it really was later, after we had learned these kind of tools in other parts of our relationship, that I then was curious to know about your point of view, and then actually asked Google, and I was like, oh my goodness, there's a whole bunch of people in the world, not just my weird wife who puts it on the counter. And then it started to open my eyes also to your side of it, your point of view, and to really get to the point of neutrality about it. Like, it doesn't matter that much to me anyway anymore. But that was a whole journey.
Yeah. And I think
the bread journey.
And I think there are a few different elements. One is being aware of choosing to compromise. And then my becoming curious, and what you said about the bread on the counter going moldy being enough for me to relate to, that I could initially with more of a sense of acquiescence, but then just a kind of comfort with putting the bread in the refrigerator. I really appreciate what you say, that as we learn the skills in other areas of our life and to embody uncompromising intimacy, that could come to the subject of where the bread gets stored. However, I think one of the really important things is that with curiosity, with acceptance, then something that just seemed black and white, right and wrong, and personal. Like, I felt insulted that the bread went in the refrigerator. It really is a totally depersonalized, neutral issue now. And once it becomes depersonalized and neutral, there's a whole level of creativity and expansiveness and collaboration that becomes possible. And if I were listening to this conversation, I'd want to know where the bread is stored now. And honestly, it varies. Like, if we know we're going to be eating it within a reasonably short amount of time, or it's sourdough from our local organic French bakery, and you know that it means a lot to me that kind of bread is on the counter, then it's stored on the counter. And if we have bread from the supermarket that's sliced, that we're going to take a month to eat.
Right. If we're going through a phase of not eating as much bread,
yeah, then
it stays in the refrigerator.
Exactly. And it's a situation where if we weren't married to one another and there weren't any other influences to consider, I would have absolutely continued to keep the bread on the counter, and you would have absolutely continued to keep the bread in the refrigerator. And now it's just based on what makes sense in the moment. Like, there's more spontaneity and more like presence in how we navigate this seemingly benign topic.
Yeah. And the way that I would say it is that once I really understood that you heard my point of view, and once you really felt that I got your point of view, then it was much easier to feel like we were on the same team and just making a decision about how are we going to do it together that didn't have nearly as much charge. But that was the thing, that was the process.
I love that you say that. I love that you're my partner in marriage and in uncompromising intimacy, because of course, what we all yearn for in our intimate relationships is to feel seen, heard, and supported. And so, yeah, any kind of negotiation, whether it's as benign as where the bread is kept, although in some families that wouldn't be so benign, in ours it is, but or it's something.
There's always going to be issues like that.
Yeah, or it's something much bigger, that the key really is to see and hear your spouse and to feel seen and heard by your spouse. And once that's the reality, then you're in a totally different conversation and you can just make the best decision.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a great way to encapsulate what uncompromising intimacy is about, because when I put bread in the refrigerator now, there's no part of me that feels like I'm compromising. In fact, it's an act of love that feels really good to me, and it's a gift I'm happy to give, and I'm not like making myself small. I'm actually making myself bigger and more loving and more expressed when I do that now, even though if someone were filming it, it might look exactly the same as it did 27 years ago when I was pissy, resentful, feeling unseen, unheard, and small and kind of lonely in that moment in my marriage because I was putting the bread in the refrigerator because that's what my husband demanded.
Yeah. And same thing. Like when I put the bread out, because I know we're going to be enjoying it soon, and it does, and this is how you appreciate it, and we all get to enjoy that. It does feel like a gift to you. It's a loving gesture instead of a compromise.
Yes. And just as when the bread went in the refrigerator, it felt insulting to me. Now, when it goes on the counter, it feels so loving to me. And when it goes in the refrigerator, I don't even know how to finish that sentence. It's really not that important to me. So
that's the bread story.
That's the bread story. And actually, I'm reminded of my absolutely favorite personal growth bumper sticker statement, which is, how you do anything is how you do everything. And so where the bread goes, I don't know how important that is, although I'm guessing you, listener, can relate. But how we do anything is how we do everything. And so every single interaction, complication, and glory in a marriage is fodder for how things can be in any other area. And that's why this is a story worth telling. Any last words that you want to share, sweetheart?
Nope. That's the whole story.
Okay. Well, I hope this made you smile. And if you'd like to learn how to achieve and embody uncompromising intimacy in a way that fits your marriage, be sure to check out alignedhotmarriage.com.